Hello, Education 2220 students. I hope everyone is having a great week. So, last week we worked in Module 4, which was talking about partnering with families and engagement. This week, we're going to turn our focus to the UDL principles. Now, remember, UDL is Universal Design for Learning. Specifically, we're going to be looking at UDL's three core principles, which are representation, action and expression, and engagement. So we really want to look at how also this differs from differentiated instruction because this is really going to help you not only with inclusive design, but how do you support students in an inclusive classroom. So let's go ahead and get started with our module overviews and outcomes. Now, we know that UDL really is a framework, right? And it really helps you look at your classroom environment and your diverse learners, excuse me. So it's going to let you see, okay, what are their strengths? What are their needs? How am I going to plan instructions to support all learners, right? So when we're thinking about our learners and what we need to support, we're looking at their abilities as far as seeing, hearing, speaking, reading, writing, moving, comprehend, attend, organize, engage, and remember. So we're looking at all of those things. So when we look at specifically the three core principles of multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression, and then multiple means of engagement, we really break it down into simpler terms for you. Representation, think of it as the what of learning, right? Action expression is how of learning. And then multiple means of engagement is the why, right? So we want to know what they're learning, how they're going to learn it, and the why. Okay. So within this module, we're going to dive into those three principles. But we're also going to look at examining those practices and strategies of how you support them, not only academically, but think about behavior management and pulling in assistive technology as well. Now, their learning objectives for this module is to define the term universal design, explain universal learning design and how it's evolved, discuss the three essential qualities of UDL, and then compare and contrast UDL and differentiated instruction. So these learning objectives are going to help us meet the following course outcomes. Explore the different types of placements and related services for students with exceptionalities and the use of characteristics of each to determine the least restrictive environment for each individual. Articulate a general understanding of the assessment process leading to a student's eligibility for special education services. Demonstrate and discuss and demonstrate basic knowledge and skills in constructing and modifying classroom learning environments by identifying roles, responsibilities, and best practices for regular education teachers when working with students with exceptionalities. And then lastly, explore the importance of implementing appropriate behavior management techniques, modifications, and accommodations, including assistive technology for students with exceptionalities. So as you can see here, there are plenty of outcomes that we're going to be working toward mastering with this module. Now, just to reiterate, the best way to kind of navigate through the modules are always to click the arrows forward and back. So the next thing I want to look at is the keywords and concepts. Now, we're defining Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. So we know that's this proactive framework, right? Meaning that you are going to really look at this designing of your lesson plan, of the instruction itself, to meet the needs of all your learners. Now, this was developed by CAST, which is also known as the Center for Applied Special Technology. And then also how it evolved from universal access, right? So that came from the architectural design principles, thinking about how we try to make all buildings more accessible, thinking about curbs, automatic doors, doors widening, ramps, those sorts of things. Okay, and how it really kind of took off from there. So the three core principles we already mentioned, right? They're going to help guide your instructional design, right? And your classroom practice. So this extends even to the learning environment and how you set your classroom up as well. So again, when we're talking about those multiple means of representation, look at how are you presenting the material specifically. Think about text, audio, visuals. This is really going to help support varied learning styles and sensory needs. So, the easiest way to do that is to pull in all of this as much as you can. So, always looking at audio, visuals, um, and text. And that's going to help support varying needs of different learners, also those sensory needs. Multiple means of action expression, again, thinking about how the students are going to demonstrate what they're learning, right? So, are they going to write something for you? Are they speaking? Are they drawing using technology? This is where choice will come in sometimes too, depending on the learner's needs and their varying abilities and their IEP goals. So, thinking about how they can present what they're learning to you. Engagement is a big one. So, multiple means of engagement is thinking about obviously choice, which we talked about. So up above with the action and expression, I mentioned choice, but when we're talking about multiple means of engagement, choice really helps motivate learners, right? They feel like they have a little bit of autonomy, if you will. So this also helps reduce barriers, right? And we want to draw on their interest and pull them in. We also think about our classroom culture as well. So, when we talk about learner differences, we think about learner variability. So, this is really recognizing that people perceive information, take it in, express their learning in different ways. So, because we have such a range of diverse abilities, right, this is going to extend to attention, span, language, memory, physical access. Again, thinking about your classroom as a third teacher, right? Going back to that, thinking about how do we design instruction specifically related to learner variability. And inclusive design really it just talks about how you're designing your environment, which is your classroom, also your curriculum. We want it accessible from the start, right? We don't want to have to make accommodations and retrofit later. We want to already have that in play before we even start the lesson. And really, when you're doing UDL, we have to learn to be flexible, right? We have to be flexible with maybe their goals, flexible with the methods, materials, and assessments because we have to support all learners. So, flexibility is going to be a big part of it. Now, we said that you were going to learn the difference in what UDL is versus differentiated instruction. So, when we're talking about UDL, remember, how you can decipher between the two is that UDL is always going to be a constant, right? You always think about how are you going to deliver the content and keep them engaged by thinking about all the diverse learners. Whereas if you do differentiating constructions, you have to make adjustments after you identify their needs. With UDL, you're already thinking about all the needs before you even get started, right? So you may not even know that, you know little Johnny's having trouble. He hasn't been tested and evaluated for special ed yet, but we know there's something going on. But if you are trying to meet the learners and think about that from the very start, that is the difference between differentiating instruction, right? You're not making adjustments after the fact. You can go ahead and just have it accessible for everyone from the very beginning. Technology integration is really a big thing when we talk about UDL because we have to think about those students with exceptionalities, right? Maybe they need text to speech. Maybe we have to have more interactive media in our classroom. Maybe we need digital scaffolds, right, when we're supporting access, and expression. So these are things to take in consideration. And also, when you do DL, we also have to have the variance in what we call assessments. So these assessments in UDL is going to really be more formidable and flexible, right? And it's always going to provide you that ongoing feedback. And if you're always doing those assessments that way, it reduces the chance of failure later on. So make sure you look at these keywords and concepts. A lot of this is going to be coming from your textbook chapter. So just keep that in mind. Now, I gave you two sets of standards. So what standards are we going to hit with this module? Well, underneath in task, now remember in task, you're also going to be looking at this with your co-teaching presentation. Your in task standards are going to be your teacher preparation. So you are training to be a teacher in your own classroom. So a set of standards that you have is going to be two of them being covered. So standard one, learner development, right? Where the teacher understands that how learners grow and develop. You reorganize that patterns of learning and development may be may vary, individually within and across cognitive, linguistic, social, emotional, and physical areas, and designs and implements developmentally appropriate and challenging learning differences. So we're going to realize learner development plays a big part when we're talking about UDL. The second standard is learning differences, which we discussed. So the teacher uses an understanding of individual differences and diverse cultures and communicates to ensure inclusive learning environments that enable each learner to meet high standards. Okay, now, what standards are we hitting underneath Council for Exceptional Children? So, standard one, similar to the in task, is learner development and learning individual learning difference, right? So, Council for Exceptional Children says that this standard is beginning special education professionals understand how exceptionalities may interact with development and learning and use this knowledge to provide meaningful and challenging learning experiences for individuals with exceptionalities. And then standard 6, professional learning and ethical practice. Beginning special educational professionals use foundational knowledge of the field and their professional ethical principles and practical standards to inform special education practice to engage in lifelong learning and to advance the profession. The reason that that aligns with what we're doing is because, again, we're thinking about meeting the needs of learners, looking at everything with academics to take into consideration the cultural background, um, the culture of the classroom, all these things play a key role. So, that professional learning and always trying to better yourself and learn everything you can about differentiated instruction, learning about UDL principles, all these things is going to help you grow in your practice and in your profession. Now, once we've looked at that, we're going to move down into reading and resources. Now, remember, reading and resources is really going to help you because these are things that's going to help you gauge with the content before we get into our activities and assessment. So, with required reading this week, you're going to read chapter 2 in our textbook. And again, it's going to explore those 3 principles of UDL and how they will support learners. And it talks about the difference and its relationship with differentiated instruction. The next thing is I've created a Nearpod presentation. Now, Nearpod presentations, again, are going to be more interactive than what we would normally see with the PowerPoint. So this one is going to be specifically related to Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. So how you will join is if you go to join.nearpod.com, you will copy and paste this code or type it in, and it will take you to the presentation, which looks like this. Now, it may ask you questions, it's going to maybe quiz you, but as you go through, you'll see that it's at the learner's pace. So it's student paced, meaning that it's not timed. It's going to really talk about the framework of UDL, um, but also the purpose of it, and you'll just see it's going to go through. And also, it may have some share your thoughts board. So it's really going to allow me to see what your thoughts are, what your in terms of the content and principles underneath UDL. And if you click through, it's going to give you like little quiz where you may be matching games, quiz questions. It's really got a lot of great information in here. Also, it's more interactive than what we would say PowerPoint. So please make sure that you go through that because it's a wonderful resource. I've also included the Chapter 2 PowerPoint and Chapter 2 outline. Again, I always include these. These come from the publishing company for our textbooks, Cengage. You'll see here that you can go through. Some students like them because it helps them go along with the content in Chapter 2, so I always like to provide those for you. So just make sure that you look at it. Again, the same with the outline. You can type directly in here once you download it. But that's there as a resource for you for studying, reading, or just to keep for your reference. The next resource I included for you was the IRIS module. So these are really professional development modules created by Vanderbilt. They're wonderful because they give you like real life scenarios. They have short video lessons. Um, audio, visual, reading. I mean, it really helps promote lifelong learning. And what I like about it, it gives you real classroom scenarios, which I feel like is more beneficial for me as a learner. So this one is specifically about how you design learning experiences that engage and challenge all students through the UDL principles. So again, make sure that when you're finished with it, you also do the assessment because it's a wonderful for way for you to gauge your knowledge and test your skill set. I would recommend that you read chapter 5 before you complete the IRIS module though. Now, I always include the citation and references for what we've used, but I also have the post your questions. So any questions you have pertaining to Module 5, you can go ahead and put it in there. But if you need a quick response or have something else a little more lengthy, you are welcome to reach out to me directly through email. Now, how are you going to be assessed this week? Well, you will do two things. The first thing is you're going to be taking your Module 5 quiz. Now, remember, quizzes are different than exams. You can take them multiple times during that window. Um, when the window closes, I will take the highest attempts grade. And I did include here for you a little Quizlet to test you on UDL principles. It's a great resource to help you prepare for Module 5 quiz. So I would suggest doing that before you took the Module 5 quiz. Now, what else are you going to be assessed on? You're going to be completing what we call a UDL lesson plan. So let's go ahead and walk you through that. So the first thing you're going to click on is you'll see here, I also put notes. These notes are very helpful. So if you haven't been reading them, please read them because it kind of lets you see what each one is out, which document is for what. So you're going to use all these documents to help you. These are the instructions for the actual lesson plan assignment. You're going to use the template here below. So you're going to submit this template, but these are instructions to guide you on how to complete it. And then these are going to be your social studies standards, which you will pick one of them to complete your lesson plan assignment. So let's go ahead and start with the UDL lesson plan and see what the instructions ask us to do. So I do want to emphasize that this project mirrors our IRIS module that you complete. So you may want to watch the IRIS module before you complete your homework. And it really helps us not only dive into the three essential qualities of UDL, but looking at it from more of a proactive design in terms of instruction. So we want to shift away from accommodations after the fact and think about how do I be more proactive in the forefront. And also really looking at those barriers, right, and breaking those down and what kind of barriers would exist in a traditional lesson plan design. Now, here's your scenario. Your school you participated in a professional development on universal design for learning, and your principal asked you and your fourth grade team to model what a UDL lesson plan would look like during a school-wide workshop. So your task is you're going to um, complete or design a lesson plan that applies the three essential qualities of UDL. So it would be multiple means of representation, multiple means of action expression, and multiple means of engagement. Now, I do want you to use your textbook to help you with this. There are examples in tables 2.5, 2.6, and 2.7 inside your textbook Teaching in Today's Inclusive Classrooms. Remember, the point of the lesson plan is to design proactively, not think about accommodations later on. So, as I mentioned before, you will be using these social studies standards here. You will pick one of them, right? Um, and you will complete the UDL lesson plan template, which I will show you in a minute. The template includes the social studies standard you chose. You're only choosing one. The learning objective, so what you want them to learn. What is the essential question? It will include vocabulary and then materials and resource. Now, another part of this lesson plan when we're thinking about universal design for learning is really think about what are those potential barriers. So what are those potential barriers that you might see in a traditional lesson or in your students? It could be their reading level, their language demands, think about background knowledge, attention, motivation, physical access, or writing demands. So these are typical barriers that you might exist in a normal lesson. What you're going to do is you're identifying at least 3 potential barriers before you ever can plan the UDL supports, right, to support those types of learners and to break down those barriers. Now, for each barrier, right, or excuse me, for each principle, you're going to use the strategies inside the tables 2.5, 2.6, and 2.7 as supporting evidence. So remember, for each section, right, for each section of the UDL principles, you need to identify one auditory strategy, one visual, one tactile, and kinesthetic. Now, I didn't include that I wanted you to cite from the appropriate table, but I'm okay if you don't because I know what you're using. But you do need to make sure that you include one strategy for each auditory, visual, and tactile or slash kinesthetic. Now, after you finish your lesson plan, you're going to write a 1-page reflection addressing these questions, right? What barriers were present in your original lesson design and how did your UDL revision remove those barriers? You also need to justify why you chose the strategies up here that you did, right? How do they align with the tables 2.5, 2.6, and 2.7, and how do they support diverse learners? The last part of your reflection is really going to focus on how does this lesson that you provided reflect proactive UDL design, and how would you model this thinking during the school-wide workshop? Okay, there is a rubric here. Please look at it. This is how you're going to be graded. It will show you each section that I'm going to grade you on. So I'm looking at if you obviously looked at the 3 sections of the UDL principles: representation, action, expression, engagement, your reflection, and then I also grade you on the barriers, right? So the 3 types of barriers. So make sure that you look at that. Now, going back, I said that you would look at the social studies standards. So you will pick one, and remember, this is for 4th grade. So I went ahead and just listed the link to the standards, or excuse me, uploaded the PDF. So you will have to scroll to the correct page. Remember, this is for 4th grade, so you will have to scroll to 51, right? And then you will pick one of the standards there, or you can just type in 51. Okay. And you're going to see that there's different sections. I don't really care which standard you choose. You're only going to be choosing one of them. Okay. So you'll see here you have section standards on the war for independence. You have ones about creating a new government, building the new nation, the growth of the republic, the United States prior to their Civil War, the Civil War and Reconstruction. So whatever standard you choose under that section is fine. Now, what does the UDL lesson plan template look like? This is the template that you do have to use. So you will just click download and you're going to see that it will pop up and you should be able to type directly in it. I do want you to use this template. Do not try to make your own or find one online. This is a template that's specifically created for this lesson and for this assignment. So you'll put the subject, which is going to be, say you want to do the Republic. You'll put the Republic, you'll put the topic there, then you'll put the actual standard number and what it is. What do you want them to be able to know and do? What's one essential question? What's 1 or 2 vocabulary that really is important to be able to master that content? And what are some materials and resources used? This is just standard. I wanted you to have that there since the scenario said you would be modeling what it would look like. Those parts should be included, but remember, what you're getting graded on is going to be the barriers, your strategies for the barriers, and then your reflection. So let's walk through the assignment. Okay, so first start with part 2, anticipated barriers. So before you even start designing, we have to identify the barriers that would come up in this lesson. So there's different barriers that you might see. The three that we're focusing on is content barriers, process, and engagement. So let's break them down. Content barriers are things like maybe their reading level, their vocabulary, their background knowledge, or abstract concepts. Okay, so what kind of things would you see that might be a potential barrier? Okay, I don't want a long list. Pick one. Okay, let's just stick with one. Process barriers, pick one of those. So those would be things like writing demands, their attention or focus, their language expression, or maybe they can't follow multi-step directions. So whatever barrier you think would come up with this lesson. And then engagement barriers. These are things like low motivation, their limited relevance, or their lack of choice. Okay, so pick one of those. Now, after you pick the barriers, we're going to go to our book and use our tables to help us pick strategies on how we're going to present the concept. Now, I broke this down so you can fill it out specifically. So the first thing we're going to do is look at table 2.5. We're going to think about multiple ways to present the lesson. How will you present it in multiple ways? Remember, multiple ways means auditory, visual, tactile, kinesthetic. So tell me a strategy, the barrier that it would address, and then table 2.5. You can just leave that blank. I don't care if you fill that out, but I'm looking for these two sections here. And then a short little explanation of how do they improve clarity, comprehension, access, and focus. Now we're looking at the second principle of UDL, which means multiple means of action and expression. When we're talking specifically about action and expression, you will use the table 2.6, allowing students to show what they're learning in multiple ways. So how would you do this for auditory, visual, and tactile, and then what barrier would it address? And then again, explain how these options reduce performance barrier and allow them to demonstrate what they know based on their strengths. And then the third one, we're looking at multiple means of engagement, the third UDL principle, and you're going to use table 2.7 for this. So how will you motivate and sustain their interest? Again, I want you to give me a strategy for auditory learners, visual, tactile, kinesthetic, the barrier that it addressed, and how these strategies increase relevance, choice, persistence, and student ownership. And then lastly, your reflection. Again, I'm not going to go over those because these are what I went over earlier. These are just going to be the questions that you ask. Since it's a one page, I'm not wanting you to cite APA format, but I do want you to set them up in terms of paragraphs. So the first paragraph, you can answer barrier analysis, label it that, answer the two questions. Um, the second paragraph, label it justification of UDL strategies. You would answer these questions. And then in the third paragraph, you would label impact on teaching and learning, and you will answer these two questions. Okay, I would like it to stay as one running document, so do not submit a reflection and then a second document for your lesson plan. Just have it all on one thing. It makes it easier when I'm grading. And again, just look at your rubric to see what criteria I'm grading on. Okay, and again, you will be submitting that to the Dropbox. Okay, I did not include the Dropbox here because it got confusing for a few students. So just go to assessments and you'll click on Dropbox, and then you're going to go down to where it says module assignments, and you will click on UDL lesson plan. And again, this is going to be due on March the 5th at 11:30 p.m. Okay, so that will be pretty much taking care of our module 5. Please use the resources. I highly encourage you, obviously read chapter 5, but or read the textbook, excuse me. But what I do want you also to read or go through is going to be the Nearpod is a great study tool, the Nearpod UDL presentation. But also the Iris module is really going to help you out as well as your chapter 2 in the textbook. All right, I hope everyone has a great week. And again, reach out if you need any questions, or excuse me, if you have any questions or you need any assistance. I'm glad to help. All right, I hope everyone has a great week. Take care.